share the presentation, we can get started. There we go. We can start with the purpose for tonight's meeting. There we go. First thing, as I mentioned, the Board of Education approved our plan for returning last week. Part of that plan, which I think is important to emphasize, is it's really a plan to be ready to offer in-person instruction. If the conditions are the way they are now in our county, we wouldn't be starting. And so we have a slide later on in our presentation that goes over that. We are not permitted to begin in-person instruction if the tier is purple. Just a few weeks ago, we were in orange and hoping we'd move to yellow soon. And obviously we've moved as a community, as a larger community, in the wrong direction. Nevertheless, I think it's important to be ready in case or for when the conditions prove to be right for us to begin offering in-person instruction. And so that kind of leads to the purpose for tonight's forum. As I mentioned, we're going to review the instructional models that were approved by the Board of Education last Thursday. We'll be reviewing our safety plans and will importantly be describing the preferences survey and timeline, because that is probably what's foremost in your mind. Our intention is for families to complete that this week so we can start collecting the data to develop our plans. This presentation is very similar to the presentation that was made to the Board of Education last Thursday, and then also to the one that was presented to the community and to employee groups just a couple of weeks ago. So we're actually going to intentionally, if you'll excuse us, move pretty quickly through the presentation. The reason for that is because, as I said, we've gone through this a couple of times, although we realize many people may be seeing it for the first time, but we really want to provide time for questions and answers at the end. So if we move quickly, please just be aware that that's why we're doing it. When we get to the questions and answer, we also want as many people as possible to be able to ask questions. So what we're going to ask you to do is when it's your turn to ask a question, ask one question, try to ask it succinctly, and then we'll answer that as best as we can. And then it'll give time for the next person to ask a question. If you have subsequent questions, you can get in line again to ask those afterwards. So we can go to the next slide. Just to remind all of us, and we include this slide as much as anything to remind me of the principles that the Board of Education and the school district adopted at the beginning of this pandemic. These are the principles that have been guiding our work, and we really think that they balance each other nicely. So you'll see considerable discussion about the safety considerations that we are making for this plan that we've actually already implemented, as some students have returned to campus and many staff have returned to campus. We have to remain flexible. I kind of mentioned that a little bit at the beginning. We want to be ready for when conditions improve, and we have to be flexible to know that conditions do change. We also need to be flexible enough to meet the needs of the wide variety of students and the wide variety of experiences that kids are having with virtual school. Many kids are doing very well in virtual school, and our teachers all need to be applauded. Our professionals have done an outstanding job of doing the very best they can under very difficult situation. But we need to provide high quality teaching and learning for all of our students, and many of our students simply are not accessing learning the way they should under these conditions. Through no fault of their own or from anyone's, we just know that this isn't the best, certainly not the best environment for teaching and learning. And that really is driving our reasoning for developing these plans, is the consideration of the kids who are not able to access learning adequately in this environment. And that really hits on our district's vision for equity. So those are our guiding principles. And so if you can go to the next slide. We will begin with Ms. Ahuja, who will talk about the instructional plans.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give you a very quick update on where we are with the middle school model, because we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on some details of the elementary model. The middle school is still in development, and the considerations that we are taking into account are definitely the safety. That includes the social distancing, the passing periods, prioritizing content areas, looking at sixth grade being the starting point and then moving up as conditions permit, and making sure both schools have similar schedules in terms of instructional minutes with a robust program for student learning, and of course, teacher preparation and planning time. I just wanted to start with that to let you know that we haven't forgotten middle school. It is a little more complicated process that's in the works. And the next slide will take us to really looking more deeply as we keep moving into the instructional models at the elementary level. Next, please. So our prime considerations when we were building these instructional models were the guiding principles, in addition to the ones Dr. Gallagher mentioned, are listed here, taking the instructional needs of our students, carefully balancing them with health and safety considerations, and also considering the ease of adaptability if conditions change. And we may, as we know, when conditions change, have to switch back and forth, possibly from an in-person hybrid model to a virtual school model. So as we're sharing details of the proposed model, I've said this every single time that I make this presentation is, and I think it bears worth repeating, that this is in no way a perfect model that meets and addresses all possible needs. We can agree up front that we can find every model has several flaws because we know that best instruction takes place when a student and teacher are in the classroom in person all day. And that's something I never want us to ever take for granted again. Next, please. So at the elementary school level, we have the model, which is an AM/PM model, and every student is in school for a portion of the day, 4 days a week. And some of the schedule commonalities across all sites is that a student would have a schedule to be in person in the classroom from either 8 to 10:30 in the morning or from noon to 2:30 in the afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And that would be for 2.5 hours a day. And while they're not in school, they complete asynchronous work at home. And the period in between, the 90 minutes, is the minimum period that we needed to have our staff go through the disinfecting and cleaning of the classrooms. So that's what is going to have the yellow band that you see in the middle. That's what that's for. On Wednesdays, there is a virtual instruction period from 8 to 10 in the morning. And then the rest of the day is asynchronous work while teachers, go deeper into professional learning, working with their grade level peers and planning for, this whole different way of teaching that they have not ever been taught to do in school or their professional career till now. So some of the schedule highlights, which are on the next slide, is really looking at how we could maximize teacher and student in-person time, having the async while not in person, and really looking at parity between the current model of virtual school and this hybrid model in terms of instructional minutes. I know this has been something that has been brought up in terms of the virtual school live instruction time and the time that the students are in person is slightly different, but the overall number of instructional minutes is exactly the same in both models. And while we know that in-person instruction pre-pandemic days looked very different, we know that when we come back to even this portion of in-person, it is going to look different in terms of the safety guidelines that will limit the proximity and thereby opportunities for interaction and socialization. So we do need to be clear about what in-person instruction is going to look like. Next, please. So as a district, we continue to be committed to using an equity lens as we make decisions. And in this spirit, I want to share the considerations that have had an impact on this model being put together. So we consider the maximum in-person time every student can have with their teacher. looked at the advantages and disadvantages of having 2 full days as opposed to 4 half days. Again, like I said earlier, there's no perfect solution, but the option of having students and teachers interacting 4 times a week was really seen as an advantage from the instructional and also social and emotional perspective. We also looked at the impact on families where older siblings may be the ones providing supervision for his or her younger siblings, and really looking at some parity between what we come up with at the middle school. Looking at school, child after school care families might be dependent on, looking at transportation as some of our students are bused to and from school. And also, really importantly, looking at food service so we can make sure our students have an opportunity to get the school meals that many rely on. And with the current model under consideration, this can happen 4 days a week for our families. And with this, the next slide is I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Dean, who's going to be talking about the special day class model.
Thank you, Paula. All of the elements that Ms. Ahuja has spoken to, in particular, starting with the equity aspect, you saw on that targeted list, the first group there was with regards to students with IEPs. And so as I go through these models, that's the focus of this population, and then some of the other vulnerable needs that you'll kind of see there. The other critical element Dr. Gallagher started with had to do with the safety elements. And so those two elements blended together kind of results in these models and kind of what we're speaking to. Ms. Ahuja also talked about middle school, complexities there. And so the emphasis here as we look to this are, you'll see K-8. But the emphasis here are special day classrooms, students who are in those specialized programs as we focus here. You'll see the model looks very similar to what was described. You'll see an A group and a B group. And the goal here is that in that initial rollout of this programming, the students would come for 5 days a week, but they would come in the morning, and then the next group would come in the afternoon. As the program goes through and everything continues to be safe and allows for what we need for students instructionally, but also from a safety standpoint, then that would roll into a full day model at transition. Next slide, please. The other groups that we're looking to is our preschool STCs. And so these are some of our younger students. These are students who are 3, 4, about to approach 5 years of age. And so the models are very similar, but at that age, developmentally, it's really difficult time for transition. It's all about being in close proximity. So in order to follow safety guidelines that need to be followed, but also provide the instruction that's needed, you'll see that there's a slow phase in of those students for their AM and PM groups. And so initially they'll come a couple of days in person, and then the other days would be asynchronous, as Ms. Ahuja talked about. And then eventually the goal would be that these students would kind of have their AM and PM models 4 days a week, with Fridays being for professional development, collaboration for teachers, et cetera. Next slide, please. With our state preschool, it models pretty consistently what we're doing with the SDC preschool model. Again, allowing time for students to transition into those classrooms, and then being able to follow the safety protocols and teach students those lessons, with the eventual goal of being 4 days a week, our AM or our PM schedule for a student, and Fridays being devoted for staff development and collaboration time for teachers. Because both the state preschool and the SCCs are off on Fridays, the initial phase time for these programs would start on the 25th of January. Okay, so transitioning in, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about the emphasis we've placed on the several months, and as we move forward on safety. I'll kind of give an overview of those on the next slide here. So as we look to our school sites, protective equipment has been delivered to those sites, and we are equipped to provide what's needed as students and staff are on campus. We have began putting signage across our campuses in order to assist students and staff with following those protocols. Safety handbook has gone out to our parents and community, and so that's available. Currently, we're doing screenings, and later in the presentation, you'll hear a little bit more about some additional supports that we may be providing with our student screening each day. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shahara, who will tell us a little bit more about some of our safety protocols.
Thank you, Tasha. You've seen, many of you have seen these next two slides, which talk about testing and symptom screening. These two areas really go hand in hand to really promote safety for all. So if you recall, we've had a partnership with El Camino in place since August, and happy to say that we've resulted in almost 500 staff members being tested since the start of the school year through this partnership. Knowing that when we return in person, we're going to have to scale that up. We are getting close to finalizing an arrangement with Curative, which would provide on-site, maybe bi-weekly testing for staff members on site to make sure that we are being able to keep everyone safe. That would allow us to dedicate the El Camino Hospital resources that we're currently using for staff to to make them available to our students community. We would encourage for all students, and then try to make the two locations, one in the north part of the district, one in the south. In addition, we will try to make sure that we are putting out community testing resources to all as we move forward, when we move forward in the return to in-person planning. Symptom Screener, this is a key portion in making sure that we are taking the time. We are required to do this daily for any staff member coming to site. It is the county requirement to have that, so we would have the same process in place for students when they returned. They would have to daily screen for symptoms. We would be utilizing a digital application for that, which would be able to send the information directly to the parents. E-reminders can be sent on a daily basis for those knowing that you're attending those days, for those choosing the in-person options. In addition, there will be several, I guess, check-in checkpoints at the entrances of the sites to make sure that the testing was happening. And then the final check would be the classroom teacher, which would then double check to make sure everyone has completed the screener for that day prior to entering the classroom. So again, testing and symptom screening go hand in hand, and it really is going to take all of us working together to make sure that we're following the protocols that are being put out in place. Next, I'm going to introduce Rob Smiley, our Chief Operations Officer, to talk a little bit about the physical distancing and other safety requirements.
All right, thank you, Jeremy, and good evening. So as we've all become accustomed to in general area, as you're making your way around campus, we will have a required 6 feet of distance in place, be bolstering the amount of signage and floor markers we have on campus as the number of students and staff would continue to increase, and then be looking at how we're going to get students and those staff on and off of campus. You know, depending on how many people we do have coming to campus that day, multiple entrances would likely be used. And if those multiple entrances don't have the capacity to get everyone onto campus in a clean and efficient order, we could even be looking at something as far as a staggered start. And once the kids get into the classroom, you can expect to see the student desks being 6 feet from the teacher. And this is really to keep the students in their stable cohort, where they're in what we're referring to as a stable seating environment, all facing the same direction, and then as far apart from each other. And in most cases, that would be 6 feet. Again, we'd be providing the classrooms with signage that's going to actually vary from what you see around the campus, more focused around kind of kid-friendly signage, as far as, you know, washing hands is one of your superpowers and things of that sort, and then just working to keep student belongings separate. So next up, I have a couple examples I want to show you of some classrooms that have been set up. So here is just one of two examples I want to quickly show you. This is 16 desks organized in a classroom with a teacher desk off to the front left of the room. You have 6 feet of space between each of the students. The balance of the desks are spaced up in the back of the room, and you're able to make your way safely from the door to the hand washing area and to your desk and to receive instruction. So this is essentially what an upper grade classroom may look like. And then on the next slide, we have a lower grade classroom set up at one of our other schools here. You know, our schools have had some autonomy over the years as far as what kind of furniture they purchase. So in some cases we used to have, and hopefully we will go back to sooner than later, having 2 students at a desk to really focus on that team and collaborative effort that has been happening in the classrooms for so many years. But this is another example. While these desks look significantly larger, they are, but just spacing them out at that 6 feet, again, having 6 feet of space between where the teacher is as well. Next slide, please. Between the students being in the classrooms and the second cohort of students coming in the afternoon, if we are on that A/B model, we've purchased several electrostatic misters. It's really the most efficient way to disinfect hard surfaces, classrooms, desks, chairs, things of that nature. The dwell time is minimal, and then there's also that removes the requirement to come back and wipe up that surface. So we'd be disinfecting the classrooms between each of those cohorts. Restrooms would be disinfected midday between those 2 cohorts as well. And then of course, everything would be cleaned and disinfected in the evening as well. The idea here is this is you know, heavy work, so many hands help to make that work light. We've been offering all of our staff the opportunity to receive what's called IPM training, integrated pest management, so that they are actually able to use a disinfectant in a school environment, and the district will be providing staff with as much of that disinfectant as they would like. So it's not something that's out of a teacher budget or staff budget or asking for donations. We have ample supplies and we're ready to provide staff members with the proper disinfectant. Next slide, please. Something that's been big in the news lately has been ventilation. All of our air filters in rooms that have forced air HVAC systems have been upgraded to MERV 13 or better filters. There are a few rooms in our district that aren't able to house MERV 13 filters, and largely that's just due to the fact they don't have a forced air system. There's a couple of classrooms that have a radiant heating system in the room where you have the hydronic piping in the floor. So we are providing air scrubbers with a HEPA filter that's actually able to, that's rated in excess of the amount of square footage or the volume of that room. So if we can't do it through the HVAC system, we put something in to supplement that. Records are being maintained of the filter change, and that's all being done per manufacturer and manufacturer recommendations. But beyond that, we actually observe how the systems are running to ensure that if there is a need to have that happen prior, and really just make sure that it's looking out for both the balance of keeping the air as safe as possible and making sure that our units are still able to function. These recommendations have come from a society that works directly with doctors and healthcare professionals. So this is something that, you know, we aren't making this up on our own. We're receiving guidance from these various groups and then implementing the guidance as best practices. And then beyond that, if staff members so chose, they have the option to open the doors and windows. And all 10 of our schools, we love them equally, but they are all not the same. You know, different ones have different numbers, points of ingress and egress. Restrooms are configured differently. So based on how many students are going to be on campus, there will additionally be a site-specific protocol that's going to be more about the ebb and flow of students, staff, and the comings and goings. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'll pick it back up here. Staff and parent guardian communication is the next section. I put up this slide just to recognize the fact that the Sunnyvale School District is, you know, made up of roughly 850 dedicated employees. So we've been meeting and having staff interactions with all of those groups as we prepare our in-person planning. On top of that, obviously, we have our 6,049 students as well, but just also recognizing that some of our staff members are also parents in the district. So this is a lot of moving parts. So circling back to the instructional in-person model that Mala covered at the beginning, our goal is to be able to offer or keep our focus at each individual school site for planning. You know, we want to try to ensure an in-person option for every grade level at each school site. Obviously minimize the disruption of class configuration, by trying and accommodating the in-person requests at the school site to minimize overflow between school sites. And then just making sure that everyone knows that any shifts caused by this reshuffling due to the returning in-person planning, that would be for only the remainder of this school year. And that would be for students and or staff in order for us to make this in-person plan work. You should have been receiving all school sites, elementary school sites deployed their preference survey. I checked about 4:30 today. We have received over 500 responses already. Again, these are grades TK to 5. We are trying to provide opportunity for parents to express their wishes in 3 main areas. The number one is they want to remain in virtual. This was made clear based off of feedback we received from the Panorama survey that there is a significant portion of the parent population just not wanting to return or have found their groove or comfort level within the current virtual program. So that would be option A. Option B would be opting for the in-person hybrid program. That would be the second competing interest, if you will. And then through our parent forums and actually the reopening advisory task force, it became clear that the draw or the relationship that you set with your current teacher is also the third competing interest. So we try to have that be an option that you want to express upfront. So that would be C and D. We do need to ask in case that the teacher is either potentially reassigned to another site or has to go out on leave and not available, that what the parent's preference is absent the current teacher's assignment. So your survey should include for options B, C, and D an AM or PM preference, because the school sites are already well aware in keeping siblings together in the same time slot if requested to minimize the drop-off and pickup times. Program preferences are not guaranteed, but we will do our best. I want to kind of repeat that. Program preferences are not guaranteed, but we're going to do our best. So again, we're trying to offer parent choice to voice 3 competing interests, which would be remaining in virtual, returning in person, or trying to remain with the teacher. So the next steps, Dr. Gallagher covered this, but we thought we would just really, because the timeline is a reinforce that, and we were just talking prior to the start of this, is the fact that with the county re-entering purple, that is on everyone's mind. So we want to make sure that the timeline is a independent but equally important part of this returning plan. So again, if we're an orange or yellow tier, we will implement. Red tier is a little more tricky because we need to be in red for 2 weeks coming out of purple in order for us to move forward. And then Dr. Gallagher talked about the purple tier. But just wanting to make sure that we are, even in purple, we are obligated to provide implemented targeted intervention and assessments to our populations, special populations, given ed code and other requirements. So just wanting to make that clear. We'll phase in the implementation. You'll see that shortly with the timeline. Families will receive 2 weeks notice of any change of their students' classroom configuration. And if you have any questions about the survey, please reach out to your individual school sites. They would be the best part to start answering your questions. I wanted to include 4 FAQ briefly. So the district, why are we reorganizing all classes? The only way for us to ensure students remaining in the classes would be to force the condition of either everyone staying in virtual or everyone returning. And as I mentioned before, the Panorama survey really indicated that there were a wide variety of comfort levels and opinions. So we're trying to make sure that we offer parent and guardians their preference. Am I guaranteed my instructional preference? All students can opt to remain in their current program, but will not necessarily remain with their teacher. And again, I bring that up because we're going to try to minimize disruption to classes. However, as I mentioned before, we have 857 staff members in the district, not all teachers, but the COVID is impacting all of us in different ways. So we wanted to just make sure that we can't guarantee, but we'll do our best in classroom assignments. When will I know my class assignment? It's going to take the school sites a couple of weeks once we gather, the survey closes this Friday, to gather that information and to plan. So as such, you will not hear any updates prior to the holiday break. Dr. Gallagher made a directive that we are all to enjoy our holiday break, so we are taking that to heart. And then lastly, if we can't get a hold of somebody or someone just doesn't respond to the survey, what is going to be the default instructional program? Given all of the safety protocols that we clearly laid out, we couldn't make the assumption that we would subject someone to the AM/PM model with the safety considerations that are going to be going into place. Thus, virtual learning program would be the default if we don't hear from anybody. Timeline is we're going to close out here with this. So this is just a rough overview of the next 8 weeks. The colors on the left indicate the month. So this tan is the last day of November. That's today. TK to 5th grade instructional program preference was sent out by each school site. Just a reminder, preschool SDC special education programs will be or should have been directly contacted by the special education department. And then as Assistant Superintendent Ahuja mentioned, the middle school process is still underway. So middle school communication will be sent at a later date. Friday, December 4th is this Friday. The parent survey will close. Next week, Monday, December 7th through Friday, December 13th will be dedicated to parent follow-up because, again, we are committed to the school sites reaching out and trying to make contact with every parent because we do want to hear every parent and guardian. In addition, we will then start the class reconfiguration planning process, prioritizing grades TK, K, and 1 because that is our first cohort plan to be back. December 4th, the last week before break, class reconfiguration continues, and then site preparations as needed, and then the holiday recess. That brings us to January 4th, 2021. Everyone is back on that Monday. In your current virtual school, the current program, I thought that was important to say because at one iteration, we had the timeline with reorganization at this point, but again, clearly stating that we were going to start off January 4th within our current virtual school program. We will be launching on that week the staff and student COVID testing program. And again, we've built in a 2-week period as we come out of break to really have the testing period take into effect as well as assess the current colored tier of the county at that time. On Thursday, January 7th, the board had a board meeting scheduled already, and we built in a consideration to the returning in-person timeline kind of as a checkpoint on January 7th. If we are, given the criteria mentioned before, if we are a go, Friday, January 8th, we would announce the TKK and first grade reconfiguration with the start date of Thursday, January 21st. So that's roughly the 2-week notice there. Friday, January 15th, we would announce the second, third grade class configuration, which is the second cohort with the start date of Monday, February 1st. Thursday, January 21st would be the start date for the TKK first grade class that I talked about, keeping in mind that pre-K to 8 SDCs. Tasha, do you want to just touch on this really quick?
Yes. So because the classrooms are much smaller for those specialized day classrooms, and they also have some similarities across the programs, the rollout will be for all grade levels for those special day classrooms. And that will also align with some of the transportation needs that some students may also need. So that's kind of the purpose for that. And it also touches upon some of the specializations that were mentioned earlier as we looked at some of our special populations.
Following the same pattern then, Friday, January 22nd would be the announcement of the 4th and 5th grade class reconfiguration with the start date of Monday, February 8th. This would be the third cohort back. Then we're into February, start date for 2nd and 3rd grade on February 1st, start date for 4th and 5th on February 8th. And I put 3 asterisks here on this February 8th because this is a pretty aggressive timeline. And just remember it's all hinged again on the colored tiers as we emerge from our holiday break in January. So I think that brings us to the end now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I believe we can start taking questions.
Yes, we can. So Ms. Wilson will kind of help with the coordination of the questions. We are going to limit you to 1 minute and 1 question per turn. Like I said, I expect we're going to have quite a few questions. We already have 8 or 10 hands in the air ready to ask questions, and we want to get through as many as we can. And you have our full district leadership team here with you to do the best we can to answer your questions so that you can make the best choice you can for your family in your preference survey. So with that, Aaliyah, do you want to get us started?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gallagher. As Dr. Gallagher mentioned, if we could keep it to one question in a minute or less would be great, because now we're at 18 hands raised. If you haven't already, please go ahead and raise your hand. And I see that we have some people that have called in. So those folks who have called in, you can use *9 to raise your hand if you also have a question. And with that, first up is Brooke, and then Chung Ping, and then Zuzul. And Brooke, I'll go ahead and move you over if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is, Ms. Dean, I really appreciate you adding your pronouns. I think that's very inclusive, and I would appreciate if the rest of the board did that. My question is one question, but it has 3 parts. So what constitutes an appropriate mask? Who's responsible for enforcing that they're worn? And what happens if the staff or child shows up without one? For example, I've seen bandanas, I've seen buffs, I've seen a piece of cloth. What are we going to do about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Tasha or Rob, you want to take a stab at masks?
All right,
Sure.
so I'll tackle a couple pieces of your question. Thank you for the question, Brooke. So as far as when staff or students arrive at campus and they may have forgotten their face mask or face covering, or that maybe that face mask or face covering got soiled during the day, we have a very substantial supply of both children and adult size face masks. They are both the disposable type, the blue type that you see a lot of people walking around with, and then double layer cotton face masks as well. So the double layer is really to conform to the recommendations as far as what's been made by the county health department. And then as far as acceptable masks goes, we're really encouraging folks to follow those same guidelines as far as the double layer cotton and the disposable masks. I'm trying to remind people that masks such as the N95s are to be reserved for medical professionals. However, if that's what a family member chose to send their child in, that would qualify them as well.
And then we do understand that children are children. So a big part of us is just not having the mask, but also the education of why we have them and how to wear them. And we definitely have that planned in different ways by which to do that with our students, because we have students as young as 3 years old. So their learning and their development will be a little bit different.
Thank you. Next up is Chung Ping, then Zuzul, then Vivian. Chung Ping, it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, there we go. Yes.
Hi. So our question is that next year, January 4th, when we come out of holiday breaks, if we're still in purple or we're in red but not 14 days yet, when the board had a meeting say, oh, we're not going to implement this timeline that we are having right now, do you still reassign class at that point?
Why don't you take that one, Mr. Nishihara?
No. The intention of the check-in would be that the timeline could be shifted, like the rollout timeline can be shifted given that the conditions that were coming out of the break-in. So depending on what we are in January 7th, and if that decision is made to pause, everything just gets picked up and moved forward, and we can put it back down. We would probably propose a new timeline at that point. Great question.
Thank you. Next up is Zuzul, then Vivian, then Carlos.
Hi, in communications to parents, it was mentioned that students will be having 2 meals on campus, either breakfast and a snack or lunch and a snack. I wanted to know how that will work in terms of how much of the 2 hours and a half that students are on campus is eating, receiving academic instruction, where is that gonna take place? And if it's optional for parents to have the students only in the academic portion and eat at home.
Students will be provided a breakfast and snack at the start of their school day, and then they will have a hot lunch and a frozen dinner with reheating instructions to take home with them. I haven't thought about kids eating off campus completely. Obviously, it's your choice. You don't have to participate in the school provided meals, but it would be available to you if you chose to do that for your child.
And the meals are not part of the instructional time in the classroom. It would be either before for the AM group or before their session for the PM group.
And next up is Vivian, then Justwant and Christine. Vivian, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, cool. I just want some clarification on the special education classes. So I assume that includes OT services or speech classes. That's my assumption because my child has been receiving those and I haven't been contacted by the district so far. So I just need some clarification on in terms of the schedule. When will those classes be conducted and whether they will be in person or virtual? Thank you.
Good question. The emphasis that we presented for the students today is students who are in special day classes. Students who have services that you mentioned, such as occupational therapy, those services will continue through teletherapy unless students are not benefiting. And if students are not benefiting, then they would have access to those services in person, but in alignment with the timeline that Mr. Nishihara talked about. So it would be based upon safety and the ability to access the services, unless the students are in the special day classroom.
Thank you very much. Next up is Christine, then Hemal, then Lawrence.
Hi, my question is, given we're in purple, if we would like our children to go back for part of these day schools, is the assumption that if we fall back into purple that they would go back to virtual for 3 weeks? Like, how does that work? Because it feels really disruptive to a teacher and to the students.
I think that's a really good question. The state guidelines allow schools, once they've started, to continue. So for example, I think Palo Alto and Los Altos are the only school districts in our county that have started some classes in person. Even though it's now purple, they're allowed to remain in session. And so that would be, our intent would be to continue. Now, there are conditions under which, if there are positive cases in a classroom or a certain percentage of the school population has positive cases, that requires either the classroom first or perhaps an entire school to go to virtual school. So we would be following those guidelines. Anything I should add to that, Dr. Dean? To get it?
Yes, that is correct. And the only reason that would change would be if we got guidance from the health department that said we should do something different.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up, we have Hemal, then Lawrence, then Laura.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for doing so much of outreach and thinking and planning, and I'm sure it's never enough, but I'm going to get straight to my question. With respect to if we choose to go with the virtual school, will we be doing the same schedule of 8:30 to 11:45 and then 2:10 to 2:30? There would be a closing circle and things like that?
Yes, that is the plan. The virtual school model does not change.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Next up is Lawrence Lamb, then Laura Solis, then Carolina.
Hi, can you hear me? Great, thank you. So thank you very much for sharing the plans with us, the updated plan, because it definitely looks different. I think a lot of this has to do with timing more than anything else. given that we only spoke 18 days ago, and when we're happily going into orange, hopefully into yellow, 18 days later, we're in purple. It feels like that there's an urgency for commitment in the survey of completing it by Friday, not knowing all the implications of the community spread and so on and so forth, even a month out. And the commitments till the end of the school year, which seems like a really, really big commitment, right? You say, okay, we bring the kids back to school, but then all of a sudden things go really bad over the Christmas holidays, exceptionally bad. Then what do? We have to make changes, right? But we can't do that because we committed to the end of the school year. That's a big concern for me and my kids. It's just it feels like the timing is not quite right because of the speed in which we can move through the different tiers very quickly, and the fact that things are not looking well after what happened during October, for Halloween, and of course what happened over last weekend. We have no idea, and we won't know for another 2 weeks, and then Christmas is another round of this. So I don't know. It just feels like that maybe we need to rethink the December 4th deadline. I know you need some sort of idea of what you need to do, but again, that's say, okay, on December 4th, you're going to decide, but then come January 18th or whatever the date is on that you actually made a commitment, you don't feel comfortable, what happens?
Lawrence, thank you for the question. Just to remind everyone, if conditions remain as they are now or worsen, we won't be starting with in-person. So we're not permitted to start in the purple, and we wouldn't start certainly if things are getting worse at any rate. So we do need the time to be ready to go. We need to start collecting the data so that we can have the plans ready when the conditions are right. How confident am I that that's going to be mid-January as our plan lays out? I'm not 100% confident about that. I know things can change a lot in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but I'm not 100% confident. But what I do know is that by putting together these plans, by collecting the data about what parents and families are comfortable with once conditions allow, that will allow us to put together the plans so that we can return kids to in-person instruction. Again, really focusing on the kids who are not learning, not accessing learning in the current environment. Again, that's the strong purpose for this. Some families will say, I just don't know what the conditions are going to be. They may switch back and forth in the spring. So that's not for me. And we absolutely respect that perspective. And we're offering that as an option. But some families, some kids just aren't accessing learning. So we need to get them back in school when it's safe.
Next up is Laura Solis, then Carolina, then Pragati.
Hello?
Can hear you.
That's
Hello.
good. All right. I'm allotting my time to my daughter. She wanted to speak to the board, and since it was past her bedtime by the time question and answers, so she would like to speak.
Okay. Hello, my name is Emma Mora, and I am a third grader at Vargas School. I am really sad because I don't want to lose my teacher. Ever since I was in first grade, I always wanted Mr. G for my third grade teacher. Now that I have him, I am told I'm not going to be in his class anymore because my parents can make the wrong choice. It makes me mad and sad that my voice is not being heard. My teacher and all the teachers in the school district are amazing. And it is not fair to move the teachers and students away from their classes. I asked Dr. Gallagher and the experts to reconsider the choices so I can keep my teacher. Thank you. Any questions?
No, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. And I agree, your teacher's wonderful. I've been in his classroom many times. I can tell you that one of the choices that Mr. Nishihara is putting on the survey is for kids and families just like you who really want to stay with the teacher no matter what. That's one of the options. And we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. We can't 100% promise it, but we agree with you that wherever possible, when families have that preference, that's the preference we want to honor. So thank you for sharing that perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma and Laura. Next up is Carolina, and then Pragati, and then Sakti.
Hi there, this is Carolina. I have a question regarding priority placement. Is there anything specific planned? So on the list of the on the slide earlier, it was listed that priority placement might be for the special ed kids, so for social economic reasons, for the kids who are not learning very well in the virtual school system model at the moment. What about the families where you have both parents, essential workers who need to work at their workplace? They cannot work from home, and they have kids at home all the time, and they need to figure out how to navigate life in this system. Will this be a consideration for the priority placement?
Jeremy, you want to start on that one, Mr. Nishihara?
Sure. I guess there's two parts to that question. One is utilizing essential worker for we did talk about that, and I guess given the instructional model being prioritizing the AM and PM, that was one factor in not listing the essential workers, as it was not designed to support a full day instruction every day. It's half day every 4 days a week. The other side of that is we started investigating the actual definition of a essential worker, and it gets pretty broad in the sense that food industry, medical, fire, safety, education, even delivery drivers. It started to get pretty broad. So we really wanted to have the priorities focus on the students, and not to say that the trying to identify, I guess, childcare options to augment the AM/PM schedule in person. That's probably where we're trying to I think, focus our efforts with potentially our supervised learning group. So, Dr. Gallagher, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but that's kind of it's a tough decision and a tough consideration, but it's pretty complex.
I think that captures it. Thanks.
Thank you. The next up, we have Pragati, then Sakti, then Selena.
Hi, this is Pragati's mom. I have like a couple of questions. So one thing is like I'm not able to understand the third and fourth option, like stay with the current teacher if not virtual, and the fourth one is like stay with the current teacher if not hybrid. Like what is the difference between the third and the fourth option?
Great question. The third and fourth option go together. And the reason why we had to have two different versions of that is in the case that the teacher is not available to teach that grade level for any number of reasons, be it they had to, again, COVID is impacting all of us differently. So the teacher may not even be, might have to go on leave in that regard. So we had to have your preference if the teacher wasn't even in that assignment. So that's why we kind of kept that there. So it's just no understanding that the reason I mentioned that that we've been communicating with our employees as well is that they have personal considerations also that we're trying to balance and keep into effect. So we needed to make sure we knew your preference if if the teacher wasn't an option, I guess is a better way to say that. So again, option A is remain in virtual if that's where your comfort level is. Option B is return in person if that's where your comfort level is, and then C and D kind of go together. To get to Emma's point, that's the one to say, look, the teacher relationship is the key. So regardless of the assignment that the teacher is, we want to go with that choice, but we do need that secondary choice just in case. So
sure, got it. The other question would be like, suppose like now I'm like selecting to come in person, and if I feel uncomfortable after like 2 or 3 weeks, like I'm not ready to come, like do I have an option to change my choice, or like is it until December 4th within which I have to give my suggestion or my choice?
I think, yeah, the shifting would, we won't know that fact until we have capacity on the assignments. I don't want to say that's off the table, but we have 4,200 students, and so yeah, we want to just make sure that we can get everybody placed first, and then definitely would have conversations at that point about if you don't feel comfortable. But it would be different. It would be based on space availability in the other assignment, because I guess it could work both ways, virtual to in person or in person to virtual. So.
And then next up is Sakti, then Selena, then SV.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the presentation. It's very detailed. Not sure if you had covered this, but if the student is returning to the in-person model, how is the teaching style? Is it like the teacher would be at their desk and the students would be at their desk and that's it? Would there be a one-to-one interaction between the teacher and student? How is it going to be?
So I think one of the photographs showed is how we have to space the desks apart so that we have to maintain that, distance for safety's sake. So the students are going to be, facing the teacher will be in front of the classroom, and the instruction is going to take place. That's why I wanted to emphasize, it's not going to look like the in-person instruction we're used to, but we will definitely still talk about the best practices of instruction, even in that kind of a setting, because there is a lot to be said for the in-person communication that takes place, even with the distance that's going to be in place. We're not going to give up many of our technology integration programs that we've already been using, even when they're in the classroom, but it does give an opportunity for the teacher and the student to be working sometimes one-on-one, but again, at a distance. Everything is going to be at that 6-foot distance, whether they're working inside the classroom or definitely when the weather permits, outside as well.
Thank you. Next up is Selena, then SV, then Yama.
Hi, this is Selena. I'd like to thank you for holding this forum. I think it's very helpful. And I know you guys are all trying to be optimistic about reopening the campuses, but I want to know what it would look like if the campuses need to close again. Mainly, I think I was looking around and what I think I read was that if a school had 25% COVID cases, then it would close. I'm not sure if that's the metric you were referring to earlier, or if there's another metric. And so my question is what recourse do parents have if they're uncomfortable with sending their kids to school in the weeks leading up to that metric being reached and the school's closing? Would we basically just have to keep our kids home and not have any schooling? That would have been done in person. Last March, parents were uncomfortable before school closed. And so we were allowed to keep our kids home, but we were not guaranteed that we would have schoolwork sent home with our kids for them to keep learning. So I'm wondering if that would be the case again this time.
Yeah, I think it would be somewhat similar to what you're describing, Selena. The reality is that in districts across the country where they've opened schools with the robust safety measures that we described and that we would be implementing, there is very good control of the infection. Like the spread is minimal to non-existent among the participants in the school community. Now, the amount of the infection that comes into the school is the same as is in the broader community, but it doesn't seem to spread in the school. So that would be the difference, I would say, between the conditions in the spring and the conditions now. Is one, we are talking about implementing really robust safety measures based on the science that has been developed over time. And two, we just know a lot more about how, and there's experience from schools that have already opened and had success. So yeah, I would say if there's a family that has a strong concern about that, then the choice may for that family be to choose the virtual school option till the end of the year. We would like to be able to accommodate people moving back and forth between programs, but we just don't know that we would have capacity for that. I mean, I'm sure that makes sense to the people in the audience too. We couldn't be moving people back and forth. So yeah, I think there are probably a lot of families that are going to make that analysis and say, I just don't know what the spring is going to look like. So my choice would be to remain in virtual school, and we'll certainly respect that and recognize it.
Thank you. Next up is SV, then Yama, then Ken Look.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I understand you're trying to tackle a very difficult problem, but I want to echo the comments of the previous parent that said that the timing of this survey is really not good. Okay, it's at the worst point of this pandemic. You're asking the parents essentially to kind of predict the trajectory of the pandemic and make decisions based on that. So I have a couple of questions. The first question is, so given that, can you be more specific in terms of what exactly are the conditions under which you will do the reopening? So basically, will it be if the county is in red for 2 weeks? Is that the condition? And second, will you please consider whether there will be an option for parents who feel uncomfortable at this point going back to in-person, whether at some point in early spring, maybe you can have an option for them to return if things do look better. Thank you.
So with regard to the question about the conditions under which we would return, at a minimum, the county would have needed to be in the red tier for at least 2 weeks. And I would add on top of that a little bit of subjectivity that would say that we would need to be continuing to move in a positive direction. So we'd need to have confidence that we would be remaining in at least red for some time. So that's how I would answer that. What was the second part of the question? I don't remember.
Second part was maybe the spring, if things are really starting to open up, we can reoffer an in-person, more in person, I guess. And I guess that wouldn't be off the table, but it would. I'm just conscious of anytime we bring more folks back and some don't want to, that it could be potentially disruptive. But I guess, we never know which direction this is going to move, which way. So I guess that's something definitely we can kind of consider as an option once we get into the winter and coming into the spring, just to see how conditions are. Just being mindful that we want to make sure we're limiting disruption of reorganization of classes again. So
yeah, that's the challenge. Not all staff are able to return because of underlying conditions and other situations, and not all families are comfortable returning. So that makes it challenging to reorganize multiple times. That's why we're trying to do it just this once, and only when we're confident that there's a return happening.
Next up is Yama, then Ken Look, then Upadhyay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is about academic standards. So we're concerned, given that the number of instructional hours is much lower, either with the virtual learning that we've had so far or with this new in-person plan. How can we be confident that the students are going to learn everything that they need to learn to be up to the grade level and prepared for the next grade? And also, in particular, is there going to be any standardized testing, such as CASP, to us check that they're up to the standards?
That is a great question, and it's definitely one that we think about a lot. We have many conversations about how do we keep the best practices, keep focusing on the instruction that our students need, balancing skills and standards along with what's most important. So some of the steps that we've taken are to really prioritize what's really important for the students to know at the grade level. But most importantly, it's what are the skills that that are gonna help them as they transition to the next. We do have progress monitoring that takes place, and we have supports that are provided for students who demonstrate additional needs. The state testing, as you mentioned, is going to take place, so that's definitely that continues to happen. And in addition, we have another state assessment for students who are learning English as a second language. That assessment took place as well, the initial assessment. There will be another summative assessment. Along with our progress monitoring is how teachers are really kept aware of students' needs and what's the best interventions and supports that they need to keep them moving forward. That's a great question. It's definitely something that has kept many of us thinking and planning and doing a lot of work around with a lot of professional development for teachers, a lot of supports, and our teachers are really doing as outstanding a job as we can ever hope under these conditions. Could it be exactly the same as in a regular school year? Absolutely not. We're not kidding ourselves. That is exactly the same, but they're doing a phenomenal job given all the circumstances to keep their students progressing at grade level.
Next up is Ken Look, then Upadhyay, then Miss Bannister.
Good evening. I currently have my child in the Juntos program in kindergarten. And I know Juntos hasn't really been discussed in this meeting, but apart from the Juntos program, my question would be when parents are submitting their request, like I've heard a lot of parents tonight talk about not being able to make the right decision. That being aside, say you've collected maybe 3 or 4 parents wanting to send their kids to school, but 20, 30 of them decide that they don't. Are you then going to look at that population and say like, okay, we're not going to expose this teachers as well as that class to just have that teacher just teach 4 kids and she or he needs to then teach the rest virtually? What is that balance to what is kind of the decision making on where's a good amount for a teacher to be teaching in person?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm noticing that when it really is a challenging question, I'll front load with that's a great question. We do have to wait for the data to come back. And I liked how you painted kind of that extreme example, because that is something we're going to have to take into consideration if it's unbalanced one way or the other, right? Because, we're not going to have this land nicely in groups of 24 or 32. I think it's going to fall more of where we're going to try to at least have one in-person option per grade level. But again, if you're right and the numbers come back, what is that called? Come back or virtual primarily for a particular school or grade level, we're going to try to hold the school site together, I guess is the question. And then, we'd have to take a look at capacity throughout the district then to try to accommodate those other 3 students in your hypothetical example. But yeah, that's kind of the thinking that we're going to try to do. We're not going to spin up an in-person class for 3 students in that particular grade level. We're going to have to really take a look at each individual grade level, each individual school site. And then I'm glad you brought Juntos up because, yeah, we know that the Juntos program is unique in its own regard. Plus, San Miguel has the single neighborhood track. For everyone out there, that means that there's one grade level, one neighborhood program per grade level. We're waiting for the data to come back, and we're already set up several meetings with the staff to really take a look at that. So the models that you'll see will be in effect, but the solution might be slightly different to try to meet the needs of San Miguel. So I think we said it at the staff meeting with Juntos and the San Miguel Neighborhood Program. San Miguel is on our radar. We're waiting to get back the student information, the student data, the parent data, as well as the staff data, and then make the best determination for that with supports as needed to make the program work. So we are aware and committed. So.
Thank you. Next up is Upadhyay, then Miss Bannister, then Blanca.
Hi, thank you. My question is a twofold question. One is just about the teachers. I'm assuming that they're being given a choice depending on health conditions and so on, as you all mentioned earlier, on whether to pick the hybrid model or the virtual school model. So that's more of just a question to confirm that that's the case. And the second part is, if I select virtual school for my son, it sounds like we're stuck with that choice until, until May. Until the end of the school year, and we won't have an opportunity to change that. But our teacher may or may not stay the same. I think my question around that is just, let's say, we have a teacher, Miss X right now, and then the teacher changes to Miss Y in January. Will we be allowed to just stay with Miss Y throughout the next, several months or the next term? Because I just don't think the kids can handle 2 additional changes, given everything that's going on. So yeah, I think just those 2 questions about the teacher aspect, and then also, like, will there be enough teachers to even go for virtual school, and the last part about how it would work. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll take your second part of your question first. I think Miss Y, in your example, that is our intention, that once we reconfigure the class, you are with Miss Y till the end of the year because of that disruption component that we talked about with SV as well. So that is why we're trying to collect that information now and make this determination, or make this disruption we understand it is going to be a disruption. Do it one time to meet the preferences for both, the parents and as well as the teachers. So your first part of your question was the survey we actually gave all staff, and I know you're mentioning teachers, but just to let you know that we have management, classified support staff. There's a whole bunch of folks that we're trying to assess. When we would call it workforce readiness, it's not a choice. We have to try to meet the in-person demand from our community. And so it's less of it's not a choice survey. It's really a workforce readiness to identify the conditions that each individual, one of our employees is facing. And so I guess that's kind of the difference than when we had the preference survey at the beginning of the year, where staff was given the choice to work remotely or at site. The survey was more geared toward workforce readiness to be able to meet the demand of in-person servicing the students, not accessing the virtual program, thus in an in-person setting. So.
Okay, and I want to kind of make a time check here. We have just over 15 minutes left, and we have 18 people with their hands raised. So we may not be able to get to everyone, but we will try to move through them quickly. And then the questions we don't get, Ms. Wilson will put the email where you can email your questions to, and we can add them to the FAQ. Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Miss Bannister, then Blanca, then Ophir.
Hi, I was wondering if teachers are going to be compensated or receive a pay increase for the increased workload that they're eventually going to have to do.
So, do you want to take that, Jeremy?
No, you go ahead. You start off.
So I appreciate the intent behind the question is around recognizing teachers for the work that they've been doing. We are working with our Teachers Association. Actually, our both employee associations and our management association, because all of our employees have worked incredibly hard doing different things during this time. And so we highly value them. We meet with our employee associations regularly, and they're the ones that we negotiate any kind of salary or compensation with. And that actually is going to be taking place in the spring. So it'd be premature to say anything, except to say that we absolutely 100% value our employees more now than ever. And I appreciate the intent behind your question, because I think we all share it. Everyone deserves to be recognized for the hard work that they're doing.
And then we have Ophir.
Hello, and thank you for the presentation tonight. My question is, what happens when a single child or teacher need to be quarantined, but not the whole class? Are there virtual plans for such cases?
So Tasha, maybe you could talk about the on-site, because there's two parts to that question. It's the kind of the on-site and then how we support. So
Yeah, I was going to ask for a restatement because a portion of it, I wasn't sure if she was asking that there was a child who tested who wasn't at school, or was a child positive at school. So I wasn't clear on when the situation occurred, because it will impact how we answer the question. So if you could restate the question about if a child or a person has COVID.
Let's say my child is in 3rd grade and I have another child that she's going to preschool, and someone in our class got infected, and so our house need to be in quarantine. So it's just my house, but it's not the rest of the class. Do my child need to stay home 2 weeks and no any other options, or you go to virtual for these 2 weeks that you need to be in quarantine?
Yeah, so you would still be connected in your classroom. The students would be connected to their classroom, and virtual teaching and connective asynchronous and synchronous opportunities would be provided within the schedules that we've kind of talked about. But depending on the testing and the amount of time and the quarantining would determine the number of days, because it will depend upon whether there are symptoms or no symptoms for the student. And so that would come from the doctors. Once we get that information, we would then be able to provide the correct protocol. But without having details, generally speaking, it would be a 10-day minimum quarantine.
Thank you. Then we have Blanca, then Devish, then Jaime Romero.
I'm sorry, Leah, before you go on, I want to be sure we got her A and her B there. Did we get that covered? I just wanted to be sure. Yeah, okay.
Blanca,
Hi, my name.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Blanca. I just want to say thank you for everything that you guys are doing. Teachers have been doing an amazing job. I just have one concern. So on the survey, I do want to keep it clear. I mean, have it clear what's my options. I do want to keep my daughter's teacher, but then I'm working from home right now. My concern is if I don't pick to go to school, the 4th option, would she still have a spot to go back to school? Because I know they're going to be, eventually I'm going to go back to work maybe January. My concern is that if I choose the virtual ones, like, can I go back to send my daughter to school if everything's good? Or there's not going to be an option and I just have to, she has to keep doing the virtual class.
So I think someone kind of alluded to that question earlier, Blanca. So that's a great consideration. So once parents make their choice, and again, this is assuming that we are launching at the timeline that we said, we want to stabilize and get everyone into those positions first, and then any changes after that, be it virtual into in-person or in-person back into virtual, is going to have to be taken on a case-by-case basis, because it is going to be determined on the capacity at the school site. Because again, we're trying to keep school, we're focusing the planning of reorganization at each school site instead of kind of treating the district as one big bucket. So I think if if what I'm hearing is that, the draw to the teacher is important, but you may need to go back to you might need the in-person option. I guess that's a tricky one because the teacher might be in a, have an underlying condition, thus be put into a virtual. And if you put option, I want to say D, if you put C or D, the school is going to assign you to that because the draw to the teacher is the the first part. If you have to have a change of circumstance come January, we're going to have that conversation with the site because, again, we'd have to look for an in-person option at your school site if there is any capacity. So that's a long answer to a very unique, or your situation, which may not be unique. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But it's a little, there's a lot of moving parts there. So we would do the best we can, I guess, is the way I'll close. So.
Next up is Devish, then Jaime Romero, then Juniper.
Yeah, hi. My son is 4th grader and he goes to a special ed class in Vargas Elementary. I have 2 questions, almost interrelated. As per the program preferences, the 3rd and 4th option, suppose he is getting a new teacher, whether it is in person or virtual, would it not affect his IEP?
A new teacher would not affect the IEP because the IEP is basically the delivery of the services and where the services are delivered. But to emphasize, our goal is not to realign our special teachers.
Now I'm asking because the current teacher who is working with him knows about the goals and working towards the goal in her or his own style, right? So the new teacher will not be knowing what the work is going on.
Yes, we definitely understand that, but yeah, that's a low goal for, we don't have an intention to switch our teachers. We have some other ideas, especially for special ed classrooms. For our students who are in the mainstream, that may not be the case, but for the students in special ed classrooms, we do have some plans in place in order to address the uniqueness that will be there for students.
Yeah, the second question is, when you told about the services, the OT and ST will go as in teletherapy. So if suppose the student is going to school in person, and then even then there will be teletherapy, means he will be sitting on laptop and going for the OT and ST in the classroom. How is it going to work?
That's going to be a case by case. Because some students are going to want to continue their services via teletherapy, and some students are going to need it in person. So that'll be very individualized as to the best way to carry out the services. And so if you haven't been called by your team yet, you will be. And then follow-up calls will be coming where we talk more specifically now about how to implement individualized programs for students.
Next up is Jaime, then Juniper, then Adrian Dorfman.
Hello. Earlier you said that if the schooling remains virtual because of we stay in purple stage, or if it transitions back to virtual, that will stay in a morning and afternoon session and the schedule will continue. However, kindergarten ends at 11:45 currently. Will kindergarten go to a morning and afternoon session come January?
The current schedule remains unchanged for all the grade levels till we move out of this condition and move into the next. Kindergarten does have a few days of an extended portion where they meet with small groups of targeted students who need additional support based on their performance in the academics that are being provided in the classroom. So the teachers use the afternoons for small group targeted instruction and individual assessments and support.
And next up is Juniper, then Adrian Dorfman, then Mary Schoof.
Hi there, this is Jessica. Sorry, this is my daughter's school account, but I wanted to ask a question about vaccines. Always the ever controversial topic, I know, within school, but if there is vaccine, is it, I don't know if you can require it, but is it, does that become part of our vaccination records, and or will it be provided similar to the testing program that I know you talked about? And then if I could, and I know we're running out of time, but I'm just building on what Ken said with regards to Juntos. Is there any case, I know you're going to look at the data, but is there any case where whether we're virtual or in person, we would somehow get bumped out of Spanish immersion if there wasn't enough coverage in teachers? And I'm in kindergarten, so I know there's also one of the teachers is coming up on maternity leave, just to give you a specific data point. Thank you.
Let me answer the second question first. We're not going to bump anyone out of Spanish immersion under any circumstance. We're going to work with that. Like I think Mr. Nishihara said, that school community is unique and it's closed, and we're going to do what we can to make the best possible program for those families, working with their needs and the needs of the teachers. So we're not going to bump anyone out of the program. Regarding the vaccine, there isn't, and Dr. Dean might know this answer better than me, but she can tell me how I do on this. There isn't any state law that governs this particular vaccine, so it isn't something that we can require. We can't require that people have it, or we just can't at this point. It's not known. And I think your second part of that had to do sort of with the distribution of it. Because you were referencing the testing. We are going to offer student testing. We can't require families to have their students tested. Similarly, we don't know how the vaccine would be distributed, if it would be distributed through schools or through health agencies. We just don't know that at this point. How do I do, Dr. Dean? Pretty good? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we just have a couple more minutes and still a handful of hands in the air. So we're going to go as quickly as we can to try to answer as many as we can in the time we have allotted.
Okay, next up is Adrian Dorfman, then Mary Schoof, then Christine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So first of all, thank you for this presentation and for the efforts and the time. Asking more about the timeline, because it was mentioned before, obviously, if I understood correctly, we need to be 2 weeks on the red tier before the school can reopen. And my question is, okay, let's say we are 2 weeks in the red tier after our due date, right? Because let's assume we'll get to the due date, you'll do all the preparation, school will be ready, but our community will not be because of the tier. And let's say a few days later, we hit that milestone of 2 weeks of red. Will that trigger reopening next day, next Monday? Somebody mentioned that we need to see that although we are at the red, we're on the right track, positive track. What's the definition of that? What's kind of gonna be a timeline? Are we gonna see that we're going to 2 weeks of red on February 10, but maybe a subjective opinion says that it's not strong enough evidence, so we're still waiting on that reopening?
Yeah, we're gonna have to make a judgment call at that time. As we said, we have to be 2 weeks in the red, or else we're not even permitted to. We have to feel like we're moving in the right direction, which I realize is a little bit subjective. We're going to give 2 weeks notice before we reconfigure classes. So that's going to mean that we're going to be going. So that 2 week window, yeah, things can change in that 2 week window, but we're going to have to make a call at a certain point to either go or not go. So yeah, hopefully things are as bad as they're going to be right now. They start getting better. We get into January, they get better. And at some point in January, we feel confident that they're going to get continue to improve. The vaccine is coming. We're moving in a good direction. That's the optimistic part of me speaking, but we're going to have to be pragmatic as well.
Next up is Mary Schoof, then Christine, then Crystal Cody.
Thanks. This is a question, if I believe is what you said, if a student should test positive, a student who is in person, that their cohort of the class would then go into a quarantine. Would that also include the teacher? And because the teacher is also teaching the other cohort, let's say at AM and PM, does that mean the other cohort would also have to quarantine as well?
Okay, I want to be sure I have the details. So you're saying two different, you're speaking to the two different classrooms, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, again, it goes back to the symptoms and what the guidelines were we were given with the testing of the student or students as to how we would then proceed with the classrooms. So everything's tied to the information that we are given on what our actions need to be as a school district.
So if a student tests positive, does that mean that the classroom is automatically, that class is automatically quarantined, Dr. Dean?
That is correct.
Okay. And so what about the other class that the teacher's teaching in the afternoon?
Incorrect. They would not need to be because they were not a part of the earlier cohort.
Okay.
Unless the teacher then had a positive COVID test.
Right. That's correct.
The other class would be a close contact twice removed instead of that close contact.
Right.
And the twice removed is not not currently a factor in the county's guidance.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Christine, then Crystal Cody, then Smruti Sahu.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi. If I choose virtual school, will my child be with a teacher from the same school or combined with other schools?
Ideally, we're trying to keep everybody at the same site by keeping school communities together. So that would be the extreme circumstance in order for us to make the numbers work. But we're really taking a school site focus first, and we know that because again of the data that's coming back regarding our staff. There's going to be a number of staff members needing virtual assignments. So.
And then Crystal Cody, and then Smruti.
Hi, I was wondering if the numbers don't get better before sometime in the spring, is there a date at which the decision will be made that the children will just stay virtual for the rest of the school year and not do this hybrid changeover with all of the teachers and everything? Is there a point at which it's not really reasonable to have the disruption for the children?
Yes, I think we had talked about that point. It's a little harder to peg that. And so I think, using extremes again, April, yes, February, no. So we've also had conversations around maybe the trimester mark. I don't know, Mala or Dr. Gallagher, but I think that is on the, that is a factor, but we just don't know when. So.
Yeah, we haven't made a firm decision, but definitely by the spring break, if there's no change, there's no way we're going to be disrupting classes and moving students around.
Then we have Smruti, and then last up is Brooke Streishock.
Hi, my question is around the sanitization of bathrooms. So my kid goes to kindergarten. I was just wondering, will the sanitization of bathroom happen after every kid uses it, or will it happen every half an hour or every 1 hour? What exactly the school is thinking about it?
The sanitization of the bathroom would occur at the time when there's a change in cohorts in that classroom. So as an example, a significant number of our kindergarten classrooms do have a restroom inside of those classrooms. So at the time when there is that turnover midday between the A and the B cohort, assuming we're on a and a B schedule, at that point in time, the restrooms will be sanitized. And the reason for it not being between each student is they're already in that stable cohort in the classroom. And the manpower that it would require to do that is far more outweighs the benefit of what we've been told from the county health department.
And then Brooke.
Thank you. The first part, I just want to clarify the answer that I got, and then I have another question. So what I heard is that appropriate safe masks will be suggested, but not mandated. So if somebody shows up with a buff or a handkerchief mask, they're not going to be required to change their mask. And then my actual question is, as we're seeing, as people gather together, go on vacations, get on airplanes, our cases are rising out of control. We have ski week and spring break coming up. So are you going to require that anybody who travels quarantine for 2 weeks upon returning so that they don't bring it into the school?
Dr. Dean, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I was about to respond. We will definitely continue to communicate the protocols, and at this time, that is the protocol that the health department is recommending. But of course, our knowledge is based upon what we know for our students, and we can't mandate that on students. As far as our staff go, we know what those protocols are, and that will be informed and discussed. But yes, that is best practice, but we cannot guarantee that for students, because first of all, we would have to know their circumstances, and we may not know all of those personal circumstances for a student.
In regard to the face coverings, Brooke, if a student was wearing a face covering that was just not sufficient, then we have ample face coverings that we would provide for the student. We could remedy that.
Right.
And we'll be providing each classroom with a tote that has a balance of PPE in it for the teacher to have to distribute to the kids. Should the kid have, again, that face covering that's not working, or they're unable to have it function properly, or if it gets soiled. So the classrooms will have supplies. There'll be backup supplies in the office. We have additional supplies in our warehouses, and there'll be supplies at the entrances to the school.
So I'd like to thank everyone, our team here that answered questions, the families that participated in yet another forum. We know this is a challenging, difficult decision that many of you may need to make. And as I said, we're going to respect the choices that you make, and we're going to do the best possible that we can to educate your kids under very challenging circumstances. And then we're all going to hope and pray that conditions get better, that the vaccines are effective, that they're widely distributed, that people take advantage of them, so that we can have a very much more normal school year, finishing this school year and heading into next year. That's my hope and prayer, really. So thank you so much, all of you. Again,